God save the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is Samantha Benigno, and I am a behavioral scientist, a career psychotherapist, a sixth year now PhD candidate, and a master's level psychologist, and I am here breaking down the Karen Read case. Now, today, we're going to talk a little bit more about this question about what would Michael Proctor's motive be to plant evidence? Like, why would anybody do that? So we're going to get into that in just a little bit. But before we do that, I want to review some little detail that came up yesterday in that hearing where we got to hear Hank Brennan's reaction to the whole ARCA situation again, right? So the defense put in a motion to, it's a whole very long story if you're not up to speed on as to what is going on with the ARCA back and forth. But ultimately, originally, Hank Brennan, going back to, I think, November, put in a request to try to prohibit the ARCA people from testifying, saying that there was some kind of, inappropriate relationship between the defense and ARCA. It eventually comes out that the defense, after they testified, paid ARCA $20,000, I believe, for their travel costs, or agreed to pay their travel costs. But because a federal, because the feds had hired them, there was an active investigation, the defense was not allowed to engage ARCA directly. And they were very clear about that. There's even an email that says, well, listen, we really can't talk to you about this. So, and then it all stops. All communication stops from that point. So, Brennan, I think what we're learning about Hank Brennan is that he likes to put on a big show, and that a lot of this is a show, that he's very aware of the cameras. He's very aware of the amount of publicity and the amount of the eyes that are on this case. And so the show is just as much about exactly that, about the show, as it is about whatever motions he's actually making. So as of January 31st, the Commonwealth has, they hired their own accident reconstructionist, a biomechanical guy, and they submit to the defense that guy's findings in like 140 PowerPoint slides. And after that is right when the defense puts in a TUI request to officially retain the ARCA people. So now, because the investigation is over, or some version of over, they were granted the ability to communicate directly with ARCA and to officially hire them to be their accident reconstructionist. So even though the official report had nothing to do with the defense, that came from the feds. Of course, the jury will never know any of this. But what ends up happening, they hire them in February as soon as that TUI request is granted. And then they get this 140-page PowerPoint. And Alessi is looking it over. I guess this is it's something that his duty. I think he's going to be the guy that's doing the interviewing of ARCA and the bio, doing the cross on the Commonwealth's bioengineer. And so the defense sends the 140 slides to ARCA because they've retained them, and says, hey, take a look at this and then give us your opinions, right? Like, let us know, come up with a rebuttal, basically, or if you have one. And so this, what you're about to see, is Hank Brennan basically saying that he is arguing against their ability to do that he thinks that the ARCA people should not be able to give a rebuttal. And he's saying that they shouldn't be able to do that because it didn't get in by the deadline. So you'll see some of that here. I'm not going to play the whole exchange. It is worth watching, though, to go back. I just want to show you one little clip from that now. So like I said, it's definitely worth checking out. It's all over YouTube. You can check it out yourself. I just want to show you one clip so that I can point out one thing about what Hank Brennan is saying. So we're going to take a look at that right now.
This is the very issue I've been concerned about since the beginning of this case. And I've made every effort to alert the court that I had a concern In fact, that I anticipated this very thing would happen. When I began this case, beginning of October, end of September, my first analysis was of the past history of this case and dropping experts and information during trial. My attempt was never to preclude ARCA from testifying, never. But it was to preclude the defense from trying this case by ambush. And it was my primary concern, and that is why I filed motions from the beginning of this case. Your Honor must remember, I was filing notices of intention, notices anticipating, things that are not routine because I knew this very thing would happen. We had ARCA witnesses where I still do not believe we have had full disclosure. Regardless of whose fault it is, I still do not believe we have full disclosure. Not just for the basis of opinion, but regarding communications between the defense and ARCA. That's why I filed this motion for discovery. And when the defense responds it's not in their possession of control, that's why these ARCA witnesses who've made representations to this court about not knowing the defense and the limited interaction with the defense, they need to be held accountable. That information should come directly from the ARCA witnesses if the defense can't or won't produce it. I believe there will be information that ARCA has if you order them to bring in all of their communications, email, phone call records, billing, and text messages. And if it exists, I would like to see it. I think I'm entitled. The ARCA witnesses provided a report that blurs the roles of the parties. I can live with that. I can accept that. The ARCA witnesses provide a report that does not have a lot of information about their study and notes. I can accept that because I have prepared for it. But what I haven't prepared for is for the defense to wait until the last minute, then move for a TUA request, which they know will take time, then provide information to ARCA on the eve of opening statements, and then expect to come in with new opinions and information and reports after we've already given an opening statement. It's not only trial by ambush. It not only takes away the Commonwealth's ability and right to prepare, it creates a disadvantage that information and argument is already made to the jury without complete information that they should have had. They could have retained any expert they wanted. They didn't have to wait for ARCA witnesses. They've had 3 years. They could have retained any accident reconstructionist they wanted, but they waited. They moved with a TUI letter on February 7, 2025.
That TUI request was 6 days after Hank Brennan turns in his 140 slides from his accident reconstructionist. So for some reason, it's okay for Hank to wait till the very last minute to get his accident reconstruction report in and then not expect the defense's people to be able to respond. You really get the sense, and I'm not an attorney, obviously, and I don't claim to be one, but you really get the sense that this guy is operating like a defense attorney. You get the feeling that he seems to believe he has the Commonwealth has the same rights and responsibilities as the defense, and that's just not the case, right? I mean, in our system, in our criminal justice system, it is allegedly innocent until proven guilty, and they are the ones that are given the leeway to prove that, to defend themselves. And this guy, who's allegedly on the side of truth and justice, is trying to tell us that they should not have the right to defend themselves against his bioengineers. But on the other side, he should be given ample notice so that he can defend against whatever the ARCA people say, who, by the way, he not only has had the report since before the last trial, he also has the entire trial transcript to prepare with. So it's so outrageous that this guy would get up here and make this show. It's really unbelievable.
Anybody with experience, including the defense, knows it takes time. If they really wanted the ARCA witnesses, they could have moved in November. We gave Judd Welch's CV in November. We met our discovery deadlines.
So he's trying to say that just giving the CV would have been enough for them to then what? I mean, just the CV is enough to discredit him? And what's the point of saying that?
And they were hard. There was more we would have done or wanted to do, but we couldn't because we honored our obligations to the court and the discovery orders. We provided the discovery pursuant to the orders so that they would be held to the same standard. And now we hear they waited until February 7th, 2025 for a tour request.
And this is so rich, right? So what he's actually saying here is the defense should not be able to respond or have a rebuttal to their biomechanical determinations, to their accident reconstructionist team. And not only that, because the defense waited, 6 days after they gave them the 140 slides, that it's preposterous that they would put in a request 6 days later, not even 7 days later.
And now they're giving new information to ARCA to come back and potentially give new opinions that we have no ability for our experts to evaluate. We have no ability for our experts to then go through and conduct more testing. This is the core of preparing for the case. They had that obligation.
This is the thing that concerns me most about this little show from Hank Brennan. If you're so confident in your guy, in your accident reconstructionist, if you believe so wholeheartedly in his version of events, why would it bother you this much for ARCA to be able to take a look at what his opinions are? I mean, think about the advantage that the Commonwealth already has. The people that the defense has chosen to defend this John was not hit by a car argument have already not only written a report that they've had for over a year, they also, or for a year, I guess exactly, they also already testified. So, of course, Commonwealth knows exactly what they're going to say, had a year to prepare with their own person, but doesn't want to give Karen Reed's team, who is the defendant in this case, doesn't want to give her the ability to prepare against their accident reconstructionist. And then, it's really just, the nerve of this man. Like the balls on Hank Brennan are really extraordinary. Because how is it possible that you could actually stand up there saying you're on the side of truth and justice if you believe so wholeheartedly in your version of events? Why would it bother you this much to have some other group of accident reconstructionists look at your guys' theory? Why would that be so upsetting? I mean, this is supposed to be a professional trial attorney. And what strikes me about this, there's a number of things just characterologically about Hank Brennan that I think are really interesting. One thing I will note, I do believe that this man has a control problem, is a control freak. And there's a number of indicators of that. Number one, you see the way he doesn't even allow Adam Lally and the other person, that lady, I never remember her name, the other woman on the prosecution side, who I don't know what she does. I really don't know what she's. I don't think we ever heard from her during the last trial. At least I don't remember hearing from her. But there's three attorneys sitting there on the side of the Commonwealth. During jury selection, you never hear a word from them. They don't even introduce themselves, which is really weird. Like, why would Hank Brennan being the one to introduce them? He doesn't even want the jury to hear their voices, right? That's number one. Number two, the entire, up until this point, from the moment that Hank was retained and we've seen him publicly in all these pretrial motions, it seems to me that he doesn't give enough credence to what has already happened. You would think if you were retained by the Commonwealth to try this case, from the second they hired you, you would have gone back and watched every second of the first trial. But you definitely get the sense, very distinct sense, that Hank Brennan did not do that, has not done that at all, and may have even not done so on purpose. That's the vibe you get, because it really seems like he has no awareness of the extreme, insane amount of injustice that the defense has endured through all of this. Like, talk about the gaslighting that he's doing. It almost has like a projective quality. If Hank had been involved in this case from the very beginning, you would believe that he was projecting. You would believe that whatever it is that he's doing, he's arguing that the defense is doing. But I don't know if I believe that. I think he believes what he's saying. I think he really thinks that the defense is trying to actively undermine him. not realizing that the defense still doesn't have any raw footage of any of the videos that they have put a request in 2 years ago, maybe even over 2 years ago. You talk about gaslighting. I mean, you talk about withholding. You talk about Brady violations. You know, it's really rich that this guy would have the audacity to say that. But the thing that stood out for me the most from this little speech by Hank is this very single point. If he's so confident in his version of events, why is he so threatened by ARCA? What does he care? One other point I'll make about ARCA that scares me a little bit. When we heard from the jurors after the mistrial, it was really interesting the way that they rationalized the ARCA people. It seemed like they thought the ARCA guys were trying to get one over on them, or that they were hired by like an insurance adjuster or something. And so they just dismissed everything that ARCA said. My hope is that because it's a more fair fight, the fact that the prosecution is going to be more on equal footing with the defense, I think that actually gives more credibility or more credence to ARCA. It makes it seem like more of a fair fight, and therefore you're not apt to feel bad for the Commonwealth, and therefore want to throw them a bone at the end of the day, right? So my hope is that by them actually having a competent bioengineer team looking at the case, not Trooper Paul.
So on Saturday, January 29th, 2022, at approximately 12:45.
So you can look at your report, but you can't read your report.
I'm just reading my conclusions based on what they asked me to do. Okay.
Yeah. So I can't hear you.
Sorry.
Okay. So
on Fairview Road, in Area 34, Fairview Road.
yeah.
It appears that.
So
Sorry, I'm trying to oppose it.
You know what? Mr. Lally, break this down. Ask
Yes, please.
simple questions so that the witness can answer your questions.
Not the most incompetent human being the world has ever seen. Hopefully, having a former juror also now, on the defense side, seated at the table, literally. Hopefully, that's going to help Alan Jackson and the team to sort of figure out what the jury is thinking, and that's in my mind, that's ultimately the purpose that she is serving on the team. So, okay, we're going to talk now about Michael Proctor. So I've done videos on Proctor before, but I realized going back and kind of just quickly looking some of them over, when you listen to his testimony, you can get really distracted by the comments that he's making about Karen Reed and how egregious they are, but then miss some of the maybe the much more important points that speak to the question that the people, the haters of Karen Reed, the people that believe that she has killed John somehow, some world, God only knows. But one of their big arguments that supports Karen's guilt is that Michael Proctor had no motive, and why would he put himself at such great risk? Okay, so that is the question that we are ultimately looking to answer, and that is what we are going to do right now. All right, so we're going to go back and we are going to read these text messages line by line. This is on January 29th, 2022 at 10:52 p.m. And this is a text thread, a group thread on Michael Proctor's personal cell phone between him and his buddies, his high school friends. Now, there's also a text chain we're going to look at with him and other cops, but this is not that. This is him and his high school buddies who, this is 16 hours into the investigation, 16 hours after John O'Keefe is found dead on the Brian Albert's front lawn. Okay. So at 10:52 p.m., somebody whose phone number is 5051 says, "Chip, what's the name of the BP cop So Chip is one of Michael Proctor's nicknames. He has a couple, I think Chip and Bear are two of them. So if you hear Chip or Bear, that is a reference to Michael Proctor. So Chip, name of the BP cop. And then he responds, John O'Keefe. And he says, how old? And then Proctor responds, this is all in real time, 10:53. He took custody of his sister's kids. Right away, a different friend responds, oh man, that's rough. And then Proctor responds to his friend saying, mid-40s. And then one of the friends, sends a link to John's Facebook page. And then one of the other friends responds saying, what's that? I don't have the book anymore, meaning I don't have Facebook anymore. And then Proctor says, this one is a nightmare. Think about the kids. That's awful. So right off the bat, what do we have from Michael Proctor here? We have him telling his high school friends, this one is a nightmare. Think about the kids. So we already know that Michael Proctor's, this is pulling on his heartstrings. And as much as we want to make him a villain in all of this, we get a tell right here that this is something that's eliciting emotion for him. Think about these kids. This is a guy who took custody of his sister's kids. And one of the first things that he's telling them, after he says his name, he doesn't even answer the question about how old he is yet. The first thing he says after his name is he took custody of his sister's kids. So right away, we are getting how important this piece of John and who he was, how important that is to Michael Proctor. Then one of the next things he tells his friends is, this one is a nightmare. Think about those kids. That's awful. Okay. Now another friend named Bird, 3 minutes later, says, I'm sure the owner of the house will receive some shit. Okay. In real time, not even a minute later, in real time, Proctor responds, nope. And then he follows up, homeowner is a Boston cop too. So the lead investigator, 16 hours into this case, is telling us that he feels deeply for the kids, that John was a really good guy, and no, the homeowner whose house John is found on the front lawn of, dead, is not going to get any shit. And he's telling us the reason he's not going to get any shit is because the homeowner is a Boston cop too. So then Bird says, he must have been a puddle to accomplish that. And then he asks, who's the homeowner? And then he says, I hope not, but I can see it. In other words, he's saying, I hope that guy wasn't involved, but I could see it, right? Okay. So Proctor responds to that sequence of questions saying, she waffled him. I looked at his body at the hospital. Okay. She waffled him. He was banged up. So now Proctor's, again, he's telling us how he feels about this case. You really have to put yourself in his mind, like put your Michael Proctor hat on and think about his psyche, that he's even reacting and responding to these questions in the order that he's responding and in the way he's responding. So now he's telling us that he was banged up. One of his other friends writes, I thought he was drunk. Did he get beat up? And so here we have, did he get beat up? He's asking directly, like, was there a fight? Proctor says, nope. And Bird says, so the owner of the house was a woman cop that beat him? And you see that his friends are trying to figure out what is going on. They're trying to make sense of what Proctor is saying. And it's funny to watch them try to put this all together. So the guy asks, so the owner of the house was a woman cop that beat him? And Proctor says, well, that's what I initially thought after talking to the Canton paramedics. So this is important because what does this tell us about what the Canton paramedics thought? And remember, you're about to see them. I think the paramedics are one of the first groups of guys that are going to testify next week. You're probably going to see them right at the beginning. And remember this. Remember what Proctor is saying here. Well, that's what I initially thought, that there was a fight. after speaking to the Canton paramedics. But then I saw the guy, which is ironic. And if you haven't seen the video that I had done with breaking down the injuries to show you what it would look like to get hit by a car versus what it would look like to get, killed by a pack of wild dogs, you can see that this question about, what it looks like and if he got hit by a car it's kind of rich, because it's not at all what it looks like when you get hit by a car. But anyway, so then I saw him at the hospital is what he's saying, right? In other words, he was banged up. He was very badly beat up. So then one of the other friends says, well, what does she waffled him mean? What is the story? So now his friend just asks him outright, what is going on? So then Proctor says, she hit him with her car. Okay. So one of his other friends says, oh, Jesus. And then another friend says, okay, that's fucked up. And then Proctor says something else really interesting. And remember, this is all happening, by the way, in 3 minutes. It started at 10:52. It's 10:56. He says, intentional or not. Now, that is really important, too. Because what is he telling us? He's telling us he doesn't know if she did it on purpose. Okay, so that's important. And then one of his friends says, gotcha. So he was frozen in the driveway and she didn't see him? Again, which is kind of a funny summary of what he's saying here. And then Proctor says one of the most important things, that maybe the most important statement, one of them that he makes. That's another animal we won't be able to prove. Okay. What he's talking about here, when he says that's another animal we won't be able to prove, he's talking about whether she hit him or not. He's actually referencing his own statement when he says this, right? So look, he says, first he says she hit him with her car. His friends say, oh, Jesus, okay, that's fucked up. He says intentional or not. And then his next statement is, that's another animal we won't be able to prove. Now, this is really important to all of the folks out there who think that he had no motive. Because what he's telling us 16 hours in is that he is not sure that he's going to be able to prove that Karen Read hit John O'Keefe. And definitely not going to be able to prove whether it was an accident or on purpose. So then he follows up. They arrived at the house together, got into an argument, she was driving, and left. And once again, and I pointed this out before, this statement is so telling to me. It really, really is. Because notice the part that he leaves out here. I mean, let's see. So his friends are asking for a summary of what happened, and this is his summary. They arrived at the house together. They got into an argument. She was driving and left. That to me feels a little bit like a Freudian slip. Like he's not aware of the fact that he never mentioned the part about where she hit him in there. Just something to note. And then the friend asks again, what's the name of the Canton cop living in Canton, the one involved? The BPD have any jurisdiction here because it was their own? So you have one of his friends really trying to get information about Brian Albert. And then he says, but I assume you guys are out to make it cut and dry because it involves cops, right? And then Bird, you can't help but kind of like Bird in this whole conversation, right? Because it's kind of funny. He's pointing out the corruption part. He says, something stinks. Like, come on, you're going to tell me that a Boston cop is found dead on the front lawn of another Boston cop and that's not shady? Duh. But then Proctor responds, yeah, but there will be some serious charges brought on the girl. And he never responds, and he never does, by the way, at any point in this conversation. He never responds to his friends repeatedly asking about the name of Brian Albert. Who is the homeowner? Which is another fascinating detail of these text exchange. So then 5051 says, I can only imagine what internal affairs at the BPD are trying to get out there. So this is an interesting point, right? So he's pointing out that, they're going to try, the Boston Police Department is going to try to get out in front of this as quickly as they can because they don't want to look this bad. They, one of their one of their cops is found dead on another cop's lawn. That looks terrible. So they're pointing that out. And then 5051 says, she's hot at least. Like, she's hot at least, question mark. And then Proctor says, from all accounts, he didn't do anything wrong, meaning the homeowner. From all accounts, which is really interesting because you wonder, whose accounts is he talking about? Right? Whose accounts? From all accounts, from who? At that point, 16 hours in, who has he spoken to? I mean, I don't even know if at that point that if he had actually spoken to Brian Albert. Right? At this point, I cannot remember off the top of my head, but he's barely spoken to anybody. So whose accounts is he factoring in to this situation? Like, who is he hearing this from, right? From all accounts, he didn't do anything wrong, and he doesn't stop there. So from all accounts, Brian Albert didn't do anything wrong, and Karen Reed is a whack job CUNT. She's a whack job CUNT. And then he responds to the question about, is she hot at least? And he says, yeah, she's a babe with a weird Fall River accent, though, and no ass. I have to assume that Fall River is a very particular place in the Boston area where, they have a particular type of accent, obviously, right? And then he says, oh, not newsworthy then because she has no ass. And then 5051 says, oh, she's skating. Now that's an interesting statement. You wonder why he's saying that, why he would say she's skating. But listen to Proctor's response. 0 chance she skates. 0 chance she skates. So I want you to really think about this. Why would he be so sure that she isn't going to skate? 0 chance. Really think about that, okay? So imagine yourself, you're home, you're Michael Proctor, you're the lead detective on this case, you're chatting with your buddies from high school on text message. What would be in your mind when you say something like 0 chance she skates? She's fucked. Because that's what he's saying. And those are not accidental statements. He selected those on purpose to communicate very clearly there is no chance, 0 chance she skates. Well, how could he be so sure? He already told us he knows there's pieces of this he's not going to be able to prove, that he's not going to be able to prove whether it was an accident or whether it was on purpose. And we know that he's going to make sure that there is 0 chance she skates. Okay, so that's really think about what he's saying there. So again, okay, this is the way that this conversation actually started. So these are a little bit out of order. This one should have been first. What does it say? It says, all the powers that be want answers. All the powers that be want answers ASAP. So this is, again, Michael Proctor talking to his buddies from high school, says all the powers that be want answers ASAP. Now, who are all the powers that be? If we're Michael Proctor, who would that be? So let's think about it. He's a trooper. He has no rank. He's a homicide investigator. At this time in January of 2022, there's 4 of them. They all report to Brian Tully, who we're going to hear from in a minute. Brian Tully is a lieutenant. He's the one that directed the CERT team just before this, earlier this evening at like 5:30, to look for the taillight pieces and for a sneaker. So that's Brian Tully. That is Michael Proctor's boss. Above Michael Proctor, you have Yuri Buchanan. And those two obviously were pretty chummy. But that's the sergeant. So, right, paramilitary organization, you have Proctor, then you have above him Buchanan, and then above him you have Brian Tully. And who is their boss and where is their office? Oh, their boss is at the Norfolk District Attorney's Office, Michael Morrissey. So that is where they are located. That's where their office is. That's who they see in and out every day. Well, who else might have offices in the DA's office? Does Adam Lally have an office there? Is that where Hank Brennan is working out of now? Right? So from Michael Proctor's perspective, who are all the powers that be? Who do you think that means? This is one of the most important questions. So you see from these text messages, what do we get from Michael Proctor? Well, we get that he's very aware of what he can prove and what he can't prove. He has an emotional investment when it comes to John. He feels strongly that John was a good guy and that it's really fucked up that he's gone. He thinks Karen is a nutbag, C-U-N-T. And he's telling us that Brian Albert is innocent and that there's zero chance that she skates. Zero chance. And why and how is Michael Proctor going to be so sure that there's zero chance? And finally, we know, okay, all the powers that be want answers. Now, this is 3 days, I think, later. This is just a few days later. Proctor sends all of his buddies a picture of Karen Reed after she was arrested. And then one of his friends, 4146, writes, "Is that chick a smoke?" And then a question mark. And Proctor writes back, nutbag, as Chief would say. Then he responds, "She's got a leaky balloon knot. It leaks poo." Classy guy, Michael Proctor. Classy guy. But where is again, we can all get very distracted by this horrific last statement that he makes about the balloon knot, right? But if you look at the one right before that, that's kind of the more important one because it speaks to the culture of the police department. Well, who's the chief? Nutbag, as Chief would say, right? So what is that telling us? That's telling us that the chief of police, whoever that is from Proctor's perspective, and I have to go back and look because I don't actually remember off the top of my head who Michael Proctor, who the chief of police would be for him. We know who the chief was for the Canton PD, the guy who's buddies with Brian Higgins. But who chief would be from Proctor's perspective, I don't know. But it's fascinating, right? Because clearly, what is he telling us? That's what the chief would say. That's what the chief of police would say. And on the stand, by the way, he lies about that and says it was, a friend of theirs who's got a nickname, Chief. But clearly, that is not who he's referring to. Clearly, that was a reference to the chief of police. And then, then there's some text exchanges with some of the officers. So here we have one with David DiCicco. And that's interesting because DiCicco is one of the ones that his name comes up, and you'll hear it in the background. Not only in this case, it comes up in the Sandra Birchmore case, David DiCicco. And I'm not exactly sure what his role was, but he's around, right? He's kind of in the background. You will hear his name here. Now we have Proctor in a statement to his sister, who we know he's very, very, very close to, a few months later, telling us that we are going to lock this whack job up, talking to his sister. Okay. Talking, of course, about Karen Reed. Now, here's his text message, the text messages that Proctor has going with the police group chat. So this is John Fanning, Yuri Buchanan, Chris Moore, David DiCicco, and Jeff Krakowski. So some of these people are his bosses Fanning is a lieutenant. At least the last rank he had was lieutenant. Then, of course, you have Buchanan, who's his sergeant. So at 9:42 in August, this is months later, August 17th, 2022, and sends a picture of David Yannetti, of Karen's attorney. And then Proctor responds, funny, I'm going through his retarded client's phone, like as we speak. I'm sitting here going through his retarded client's phone. No nudes so far. I hate that man. I truly hate him. Wow. So let's think about this, okay? Really, like I said, put yourself in Proctor's shoes. I don't know if you guys are familiar enough with David Yannetti at this point to have a sense of the kind of person he is. If somebody had said, if this chat was that his friend sent a picture of Alan Jackson, it would make sense to me. Alan Jackson is a polarizing figure. You know, he represented Kevin Spacey. Okay, I could see why you might not like Alan Jackson. That makes sense to me, right? High profile. He's got he makes a lot of statements. He's loud. He's in your face. But hating David Yannetti, like Yannetti is like the nicest, just like a local guy, a nice guy. He, even when he's being accusing them of corruption, he's doing it in a way that's kind of kind. And what is Proctor's response to David Yannetti? I hate that man. I truly hate him. I'm going through his retarded client's phone, and there's no nudes so far. This is to a group of police officers, not his buddies from high school. And two of these guys are a higher rank than he is. So again, you have to keep in mind a lot here. There's a lot of information here, and it's hard to keep it all. It's hard to keep all of this stuff. There's just an endless amount of information. When I think about the kind of person that Michael Proctor is, it reminds me of like a bulldog or like a French bulldog, right? Like he's loyal. I think underneath that exterior is kind of like a sensitive guy. And I really believe that. I think he's a sensitive guy. Obviously, maybe not the most, sophisticated, right? Not a super sophisticated guy, like a townie, right? Certainly, spending many years growing up in Massachusetts, he feels and appears to me to be a townie type police officer, state trooper. But he's loyal, and he's like a dog with a bone, right? Like they have tasked him with making sure that there is zero chance that Karen Read skates, that it's cut and dry. And he's telling us all the powers that be want answers ASAP. Now we see that he's hanging around talking at 9:44 at night to a bunch of other cops on a group thread, talking about Karen Read's, nude pictures of her, how much he hates her attorney, which is bizarre because he's like the nicest guy in the world, right? And he's calling her, horrible names. So it speaks to the culture, it speaks to the lack of professionalism, but it also speaks to the kind of guy we're talking about. You also get the sense, and this is also another point to this question about whether or not Michael Proctor, what would be his motive to plant evidence? Well, his motive is to make sure that Karen Read is guilty. And what we see from day one is that he's emotionally invested in this case. And remember, he has his sister, who is like his best friend. He makes a point to say that many times throughout the trial. And we know that. It's established fact. His sister is his best friend. She's good friends with Julie Albert. There is a very personal relationship here between these people. And that, I don't even know that we need to bring that in. I think it's a factor, but I don't even think that would be the motive per se. I don't think the motive is to protect Brian Albert. I think the motive is to make sure that Karen Read is guilty because there's a lot of pressure on him from everybody above him. And we're going to talk more about that in just a minute. Here's more from David DiCicco. And this one is also really interesting. So, without a doubt, he's got diarrhea of the mouth too. Okay, I don't know who he's talking about there, but let's keep going. Rookie move not meeting with the ME and getting that homicide determination. Those of us that track true crime, we know this already because we know how important, the ME's designation is. The manner of death and the cause of death. We know how important that is. And we know how important that is to cops because if you watch true crime show after true crime show, it comes up in almost every single episode. Because what are cops always thinking about? Having enough evidence to make the charges stick. Being able to translate an arrest into a charge, into a conviction. So here we have DiCicco telling Proctor, rookie move, not meeting with the medical examiner and getting that homicide determination. Because what did she rule? She ruled the death as undetermined. Okay. The cause of death was hypothermia and the head wound. But the manner of death is undetermined. And that is what DiCicco is saying here now. So Proctor elaborates. Yuri and I had 2 conference calls with her, had numerous photos, etc. We laid out the entire case for her. And DiCicco says, well, you should have had me or Jeff do it, meaning Jeff Fanning. And then Proctor says, if you two did it, she would have made it accidental or natural causes, kind of joking, right? Of course, it's undetermined because she's a whack job, right? Because everybody that doesn't do what Michael Proctor wants in his world is a whack job, obviously. And then, and this is another really telling statement from the cops. Dear God, what the fuck, what the hell is inconclusive about the whole thing? And that is another one of these really telling statements from this group of cops. Because it says to us that they had her guilty, no question, from the very beginning. We're going to hear now from Michael Proctor's boss, Lieutenant Brian Tully. Interesting guy. We're going to let him tell you who would be giving the orders to Michael Proctor.
All right, Mr. Lally, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Could you please state your name and spell your last name for the jury?
Brian Tully, Tully,
And how are you employed, sir?
with the Massachusetts State Police.
And how long have you been a member of the state police?
18 years.
And what rank or assignment do you currently have with the Mass State Police?
The rank I hold is Detective Lieutenant, and my current role is the Unit Commander for the Norfolk State Police Detective Unit.
And now, how long have you been, let me ask you first, as far as how long have you been lieutenant of the state police?
I was the first lieutenant in 2021, and then I attained the rank of Detective Lieutenant later in 2021.
And with reference to your current unit, how long have you been a member of that?
I've been with the Norfolk State Police Detective Unit for 12 years.
And prior to and throughout.
Just to be clear, he is the boss of the homicide detectives for Norfolk County.
The course of your work within the detective unit, the Norfolk DA's office for the state police, what, if any, specialized training have you received and or given in regard to investigations and how to conduct?
For the first 10 years as the rank of Trooper and Sergeant, I was on the homicide section of the unit. When first entering the unit, I received instruction on how to conduct homicide and death investigations. In addition to that, I attended over 200 hours of specialized training in the use of cell phones and cell phone technology in the furtherance of criminal investigations. Further on, I have now been an instructor about cell phones and cell phone technology in criminal investigations. I've taught death investigation classes around the Commonwealth, and as well as search and
I think this is so rich. This guy is teaching death investigations around the Commonwealth. I can't get over that. You should definitely be in that position.
seizure law in Massachusetts.
Right.
Now, if I could ask you just with respect to your unit, if you could explain to the jury sort of what is the role and what does your unit do with respect to death investigations within Norfolk County?
So each district attorney's office has a state police detective unit assigned to it. So Mass General Law, Section 38, Section 4 says that the district attorney is in charge of all death investigations. So if someone passes away, essentially not in the presence of a doctor or the circumstances that led to their death was outside the presence of medical care, the district attorney is in charge of the investigation or their representative. And so each DA has a state police detective unit assigned to them to act as their representative. In certain jurisdictions like Boston, Worcester, and Springfield, the DAs in those counties have said that those local departments can be their representatives, but throughout the Commonwealth, the state police is the DA's representative in those death investigations.
Now, as far as assignments go, or as far as how is it that, well, as far as how an investigation is run, how is it that a call comes in? If you could take the jury through sort of from the time the call comes in, how that investigation is.
I'll talk in a typical state. Oftentimes, someone passes away, again, not in the presence of a doctor, gets found by somebody, a loved one, a friend, a passerby. They call 911, which gets routed to the local police, who respond and come to learn that someone's passed away in the circumstance. That police department will then call the troop headquarters on the state police. The state police is cut up in different troops by geographic location. Each troop duty lieutenant would have a list of who the on-call person is for the state police detective unit of jurisdiction. They would then call that trooper or sergeant directly to inform them that there's a death in a certain community and give them a telephone number to contact somebody who's directly on scene to get more information.
Now, as far as your role as sort of the supervisor or the lieutenant in charge of the unit, can you describe to the jury sort of what your role is in regard to those investigations?
So within the detective unit, we have the homicide section, a narcotics section does narcotics investigations, and a special investigation section. So specific to the homicide section, there are certain levels of supervision. We have a sergeant assigned to the homicide section. I have an executive officer who's a lieutenant, and then me. So multiple levels of supervision specific to any of the sections, including the homicide section.
Now, turning your attention to January 29th, 2022, at some point did you become aware in the morning with regard to a death within the town of Canton?
Yes.
And what, if any, when did you become aware and how did you become aware initially of what had transpired?
Shortly after 7 a.m. that date, I received a call from Sergeant Yuri Buchanan informing me that a person by the name of John O'Keefe was found unresponsive in Canton. He was transported to Good Samaritan Hospital, where it was expected he was not to survive. Normally, I would not get a call like that, but we learned that Mr. O'Keefe was an active Boston police officer, so Sergeant Buchanan wanted to make me aware of it at that point.
And so then what happened from there as far as your unit involved?
So as we learned more information about what was found on scene by the Canton Police Department, Trooper Proctor, who was the on-call trooper that day on the schedule, and Sergeant Buchanan responded to Canton Police to begin the investigation. And they would keep me updated as they learned more information.
Now, as far as your unit is concerned, what, if any, role does your unit have, or what, if any, jurisdiction does your unit have with relation to any kind of death, whether it be homicide, suicide, unattended death, within the confines of Norfolk County?
We have exclusive jurisdiction by law, but the law also suggests that we need to work with the local police departments as well.
And so how is it that typically in a typical investigation that your unit would work in conjunction with the local police departments in relation to a death investigation?
Their detective unit would be involved if they have one, and some departments in Norfolk County don't. They would stand by to wait for our arrival. There'd be constant communication between responding trooper and the detective on scene about things that need to be done prior to our arrival, but essentially wait for our guidance on what to do next.
And as far as certain investigations go, are there decisions sometimes that are made with regard to your involvement or maybe your unit not being involved in a death investigation?
Yes.
And how are those determinations made, and who makes those determinations?
It falls to either the person who's on call or their supervisor. We don't respond to all of those calls. So a police officer may call and say that a woman in her 80s has passed away in bed overnight. Her primary care doctor has said that she struggled with cancer or treatment, and that doctor is willing to sign a death certificate. In those circumstances, it's not suspicious, it's not a suicide or a fatal opiate overdose. We would not respond in that case. That would be one that we would decline. In other circumstances, we may get the call and then learn that the person's going to survive, and so we will not respond. We typically will mirror what the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner. If they're involved, then we'll definitely be involved.
Now, turning to that point, as far as the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner is concerned, in any sort of death investigation that your unit is involved in, what, if any, involvement or communication do troopers from your unit or yourself have with the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner?
We have constant communication. The law that I cited also says that the Office of Chief Medical Examiner has exclusive jurisdiction as well to determine the cause and manner of death. So we work closely hand in hand to figure out the circumstances that led to the death.
Now, as far as working close hand in hand with the medical examiner's office, what does that sort of typically entail?
It takes a turn of phone calls. We'll call in and speak to the intake person or the on-call doctor to tell them what we've learned or what we're observing. We forward reports in every case to the doctor so they're understanding at least what we learned in the first 24 hours. Doctors will often reach back out to us asking for scene photographs, more reports, ask questions. And in instances where it's a suspicious death, we will send an investigator to the autopsy to stand with the doctor to make observations and answer any questions for the doctor.
Now, as far as the determinations that are ultimately come to by the medical examiner,
Look at the smile on his face there. Did you see that, by the way? I just want to point something out. Did you see the smile on his face in that? I didn't notice this until right now. I'm going to go back and I want to play this again. I did not notice that until right now, but it makes me wonder if he isn't entirely aware that those sirens are on purpose. Let's look at that again.
now, as far as the determinations that are ultimately come to by the medical examiner,
Look at his face. Look at his face. See it? See it? Look at that. Look at this shit-eating grin. You see that?
Lieutenant, as far as any determinations that are made with reference to either cause or manner in any instance with the medical examiner, what, if any, role do you or anyone from your unit have with regard to that decision by the medical examiner?
We have little to no role outside of providing information.
Little to no role, except we've already heard from Proctor that, we hear from him and DeChico that it's standard practice to put pressure on the Emmy to do what they think she should do. And if she doesn't do that, then she's a nutbag, as Chief would say.
And as far as the determination specifically, whether it's manner or cause, what, if any, impact does that have with regard to any death investigation that you do?
Well, the cause will give us a big incident. So we want to know if the person died of a heart attack or if they died of a gunshot wound. That's big when it comes to then making charging decisions about circumstances. So it's important to learn the cause, and to get the doctor's input on the manner is also helpful.
But as far as the manner, if the manner is found to be undetermined, would that impact
Of course
what you
not.
learned through the rest of the course of your investigation as far as charging goes?
No, that determination by the OCME is often in the early stages of investigation. And as we learn more information, the circumstances can change.
Right, but they didn't here, right? Circumstances didn't change here. So maybe in an early stage of an investigation, it's left undetermined. But in this case, the ME did not change her findings because she knows, just like we know, that he was not hit by a car. But probably the truth is, instead of saying he was in a fight, which she knows he was, because she works with these cops, to be nice, every day, probably isn't going to throw them under the bus, but I don't know. I don't know what to say about that, except that clearly she knows that he wasn't hit by a car.
And the determination that is made by the medical examiner, that's strictly from a medical perspective, correct?
Correct.
January 29th, 2022, in this call that is initially received, Trooper Proctor and Sergeant Mechanic then essentially respond to the Canton Police Department first, is that correct?
Yes.
And as far as your role as it pertains to this or any other investigation, how much involvement do you have, or how are you sort of apprised of what's going on?
Sergeant Mechanic, in this case, and in typical cases, he's keeping me updated by telephone, so I can supervise from anywhere with my cell phone. He's giving me updates about what he's learning. We'll discuss what the next step should be. And that's what transpired over the morning of January 29th.
Now, over the course of the morning of January 29th,
Look at his face again. Trying now not to smile.
over the course of the morning of January 29th, what, if any, conversations did you have with relation to the Canton Police Department's involvement or ongoing or further involvement with regard to this investigation?
I had spoken with the acting chief at the time, the current chief, the chief at the time, Kenneth Berkowitz, about the involvement in the Canton Police Department. We talked about the homeowner.
Okay, so it could have been the reference that Proctor makes. It could have been Kenneth Burkhardt. Burkhardt? What was it? I can't remember his name. Berkowitz, I'm sorry. Kenneth Berkowitz. It could have been him maybe that is the chief that he's talking about. Let's hear.
Owner, we're at 34 Fairview, and his relationship to his department. And because of the appearance of a conflict, we had made a decision that the Canton Police was going to take a step back from the investigation, and that the state police would do the investigation without them.
Now, as far as that appearance of a conflict or step back, as you termed it, what was your understanding at that time as far as what the role of the Canton Police would be?
Really to provide support. So anytime we're in a local community, we need the support of the local police. If we're going to start knocking on doors, we want to make sure they're aware or present. They have resources in town, whether it be lights or barriers that we may need to access. So I would define it as a support role.
Now, with respect to those conversations you mentioned that you had yourself and what the then current chief, Kenneth Berkowitz, who, if anyone else, was involved in those conversations?
The district attorney.
That would be Mr. Morrissey, is that correct?
Yes.
So wait, okay. This is why we're watching this. So let's hear that again. We're going to go back and we're going to hear that again just to make it 100% crystal clear who is involved in the decision making that the big decisions in this case. Who's involved? Who are the players making decisions? Who decided, that Canton would be taking a, quote, step back?
Investigation.
I had spoken with the acting chief at the time, the current chief, the chief at the time, Kenneth Berkowitz, about the involvement in the Canton Police Department. We talked about the homeowner, we're at 34 Fairview, and his relationship to his department. And because of the appearance of a conflict, we had made a decision that the Canton Police was going to take a step back from the investigation, and that the state police would do the investigation without them.
Now, as far as that appearance of a conflict or step back, as you termed it, what was your understanding at that time as far as what the role of the Canton Police would be?
Really to provide support. So anytime we're in a local community, we need the support of the local police. If we're going to start knocking on doors, we want to make sure they're aware or present. They have resources in town, whether it be lights or barriers that we may need to access. So I would define it as a support role.
Now, with respect to those conversations you mentioned that you had yourself and what the then current chief, Kenneth Berkowitz, who, if anyone else, was involved in those conversations?
The district attorney.
That would be Mr. Morrissey, is that correct?
Yes.
Is that normal for him to be involved in conversations in regard to a police department and any sort of appearance of conflict?
No, it's not abnormal for him to be involved.
And as far as his involvement in his conversations, as far as you're aware, did they evolve or were they any greater or less than the conversations that you had with Chief Berkowitz?
No, they were the same conversations.
There you go. There's who our decision makers are from Michael Proctor's
perspective. At some point over the course of this case, or at some point.
We're going to stop it there. What I want to make 100% clear when we're thinking about from Michael Proctor's perspective, who are the people, who are the powers that be? Who are the higher ups that he would be having to be accountable to? We just find out that who reprimanded Michael Proctor because of the texts? Tully. Who was involved in the conversations about whether they were going to be recused or not? Tully, the chief, Canton chief of police, and the DA, Michael Morrissey. So when we're talking about who are the powers that be from Michael Proctor's perspective, those are the powers that be. Okay, those are the guys in charge. Those are the people making the decisions. And those are the people that want answers ASAP. So that's really important to keep in mind. So those guys do not have to be involved in a cover-up if they believe that Karen Read is guilty, both because they trust Brian Albert, because they trust Michael Proctor, because who wants to believe anything else? And most importantly, because Karen Read, like the crazy person she was on that day, which we can talk more about a different time, put herself right in the middle of this and made herself an easy fall guy for everybody. So that's really important when we're trying to figure out, is there a cover-up? Who's involved in the cover-up? Is everybody involved? Are they all covering for the Alberts? No. The DA, Tully, Proctor, Buchanan, and the chief of police, they don't have to believe that Brian Albert did this. They just have to all believe that Karen Reed did this, and then it clears everybody. Even if they had suspicions, even if they secretly believed that she didn't hit him, they don't have to admit that, not to themselves and not to each other. So the only people that know for sure what happened to John are the people at that 9 o'clock meeting right after he passes away, after the hospital, before Proctor's even 100, officially on the case. Okay, before Proctor's been given the A-OK to go investigate. Everybody else just has to believe that Karen Reed did this and want to make sure that she is going to pay. That's really important. Whether they believe that she's guilty or not doesn't even matter. From what we can tell from Proctor's private messages, he 100% believes that she's guilty. I believe he believes that. Does the DA believe that? Probably. Morrissey probably believes that Karen Reed is guilty. Does Chief Berkowitz believe that? We can't know the answer to that. All I can tell you about that is that he was really close to Brian Higgins. He's also one of the people that suddenly just happened to be driving by 34 Fairview and just happened to find extra pieces of taillight a month or two later. So he's no longer with us. He passed away. He got cancer. He passed away a year after all of this. So we'll never know what his involvement was or what his role was. But not everybody has to be in on a cover-up. That's really important to keep in mind. There can be many things that are true at once. And I think it's pretty clear what Proctor's motives would have been to make sure there were taillight pieces on the scene that morning, or that afternoon, or that day at some point, to make sure that there were taillight pieces there. Especially if you think that you're on the side of truth and justice and you're going to make this woman pay for the death of a fellow brother in blue. And there's no reason to believe that he would ever get caught. There'd ever be any consequences because he is the DA's detective. Why would he get caught? How would he get caught? None of these people ever believed that they were going to have this much heat on them, and you never can forget that when it comes to this case. Okay, that is it for me today. I'm going to leave it there. That's plenty to chew on. I don't know. With this case, it's just endless. It's like the gift that just keeps on giving. There's just, you turn over another rock and there's another piece of evidence. You turn over this and there's another piece of evidence. You dig over here, there's another piece of evidence exonerating Karen Reed. So, do I have questions still? Absolutely. I don't know what Colin Albert's role was. I don't know if he was really in the house. I don't know exactly what happened to John, but I'm going to do my damnedest to figure it out. So, and I'm guessing if you're watching this, you are too, and I look forward to trying to do it together. I thank you for your time, your effort, and attention, and I will see you guys again very soon.
God save the Commonwealth.